So I'm back to read chapter 2 with permission from Scholastic of this great story, Little Dog in the Big City, Max's Story by W. Bruce Cameron. When we last left off, little Max had just experienced the outside and grass for the very first time. So let's see what happens in chapter 2. In the park, I found out that people just weren't giving me the respect I thought I deserved. Gil and the others at the shelter were not too bad. I was used to them. I'd gotten to the point where I didn't mind their gigantic hands reaching down to pet me, at least not most of the time. They picked me up carefully, so I put up with it. They spoke softly, and their voices were gentle. The people in the park were not always like that. They crowded around the pen and talked loudly. Some of them, the smallest ones, squeaked in high voices that sounded like my sisters when they got excited. Hands reached down, grabbing at me. So many hands. I stayed back, out of their reach. The right person, I was sure, would not grab or snatch. The right person would treat me with kindness. Abby and Annie, though, rushed over to the fence to meet the people. Many of the other puppies did as well. They licked the hands that reached for them and squirmed happily as they were picked up. The people laughed. Everyone seemed happy, dogs and people alike. I was not interested. I knew deep down that none of these people was right for me. But when Gail put her hand down into the pen with something in it that smelled enticing, my ears perked up. "Come on, Max," she coaxed. "Come here." That smell, it leaked out from her hand, and it made my mouth water. What was it? My mouth felt full of saliva, and my tongue slipped out between my teeth. I started towards her hand. She kept it still and let me pick something tiny and delicious from between her fingers. "A treat." "Good boy," she said softly. She scratched under my chin, and I allowed her to do it. But when another hand came down smelling of soap and harsh smoke and sweat, I jerked back, startled. A growl slipped out, and the fur on my back bristled. The hand pulled away. "Pretty aggressive for such a little thing," a voice said. The man standing near Gail shook his head. "I have kids at home. We can't have an aggressive dog." "Don't you have any who are more mellow?" Gail nodded as I backed away further, and she called to my sister. The man scooped Abby up in his hands and laughed. "Perfect! My kids will be so happy. Thanks. Is there paperwork to fill out?" "At that table over there," Gail said, and the man carried Abby away. A few minutes later, a giggling boy reached into the pen to pick up Annie and held her close to his face. Annie licked the boy's chin and nose with delight, and that was the last time I ever saw either of my sisters. More and more puppies were taken out of the pen as the afternoon wore on. Sometimes Gail would call me over to the fence for another treat, but her hand was the only one I allowed to touch me. "Mommy, puppies!" a high-pitched voice shrieked. A girl rushed over to the pen, curly dark hair bouncing on her head. She nearly fell over the fence as she reached in, her small, soft hand darting straight at my face. Instinctively, I snapped. My teeth clamped shut an inch from her finger. It was just a warning, meant to make her to back off, as it did for the other puppies. But she shrieked as though I'd actually bitten her, and a tall woman standing behind her snatched up with a gasp. "Max, no!" Gail scolded, and I backed away. "I'm so sorry. I think she startled him," she told the lady holding the girl. "You shouldn't bring a dog like that to the park," the woman said indignantly, hugging the little girl close. "It's all right, sweetie. That mean dog can't get you now." Gail sighed as the woman carried the girl away. I was relieved. The girl had gotten the message that she just couldn't just pet me or grab me whenever she'd like. I'd have to be sure all the people learned the same thing. As the afternoon wore on, most of the other puppies left with one person after another. At last, there was only me. A man came to join Gail at the fence. "Nobody interested in Max today?" he asked her. "Afraid not," she answered with a sigh. "He nipped at a little girl this morning." The man shook his head. "Even if we did adopt him out, I'm sure nobody would be able to handle him," he said. "We don't know that. If someone can train him, really take the time, he might be fine. I think Max is one of those dogs who could really bond with the right person." "Well, he might get lucky next week," the man said. "One more event, then we'll have to put him on the list. I'm sorry, Gail, but you know that's how it goes." "I know. Poor Max." Gail's voice was sad, but I didn't pay much attention to that. Something had caught my eye, and I moved to the side of the pen so I could see more clearly. It was a girl. She was older than the little one I'd had to warn away, but not as old as Gail. Sort of in between. She was walking slowly down a pathway of the park, holding 3 dogs on leashes. One was enormous, the largest I'd ever seen, a black and white mountain of a dog lopping easily along. The other 2 were smaller, one black and curly all over, the other with short, light brown fur. But I was not as interested in the dogs as I was in the girl. There was something about her. Her hair swung loose to her shoulders, bouncing a little with her steps. The wind shifted a little and brought her scent to me, and I smelled sweet and shampoo, and something minty that she was chewing, and nervous and loneliness, and something else, something that was just her. And I knew this girl was mine, the one I had been waiting for. I threw myself against the fence, barking and barking. I jumped up and scrabbled at the cold wire with my paws, but it was much too high for me to get out. I shook my head in frustration and ran in a frantic circle, barking and barking, trying to make her hear me. If she'd hear me, she'd understand. She'd come and get me. She'd reach into the pen and pick me up, and I wouldn't snap. Not at her. She'd take me like the other people had taken my sisters and the other puppies, and we'd be together. Because that was why we were here, I realized. Dogs were supposed to be with humans. All the other puppies in the pen had found the right people, and I had to do the same. But this girl, the right girl, somehow didn't hear me. My barks were not loud enough to reach her. I was not big enough to jump the fence and race to her. She walked steadily on with the 3 dogs on the leashes, and Gail reached down into the pen. "My goodness, Max, what is all the racket about?" she asked, lifting me up. "Careful now, you'll make me drop you." I wiggled and whined in her hands, frustrated and unhappy. She needed to let me down. I had to chase after that girl, but Gail carried me back to the car and popped me inside a small pen in the back, and my last chance to find the girl was gone. The next week, I was put in the car again and taken back to the park. This time, Gail didn't put me in the pen with the other puppies. She took me to a smaller pen where I could be myself. "Maybe you'll be more comfortable on your own," she said. "Don't worry, Max, you'll find a home. But be nice, okay? Be nice." I looked out past the wire of the pen, wondering about the girl, my girl. I'd seen her before. Would she be back this time? I had to be ready. If she came, I had to be sure that she'd see me. Three times people came to my pen and reached their hand down inside. None of these hands belonged to the girl, so I slunk away and growled. Each time, the hands drew back. "What happened? Was he abused?" a man asked Gail. "No, he was born in the shelter. I don't know. Max is just not that friendly. He doesn't play well with the other dogs either. He needs to find the right person. I think he'd do well with someone who stays at home and doesn't get many visitors. Well, that's not me, the man said, laughing. He went over to the pen with the other dogs, and I saw him scoop up a white puppy with eyes that were nearly invisible in puffs of fuzzy fur. Then I looked away and saw her. She did not have the other dogs with her this time. She was by herself, wearing a backpack, walking quickly, looking down at the ground. I yipped. She kept walking. I barked louder. I clawed at the wire of my pen. She had to notice me this time. I barked even louder, making it a command. It was the kind of bark that made even the grown-up dogs at the shelter take a step back from me. And it worked. The girl looked up and her head swung around. She saw me. She paused. She smiled and she came over to my pen. Everything was all right. She'd found me. The girl knelt down. She put her fingers through the wire and rubbed my ears gently. She chuckled. "Hey there, tiny thing," she said. "You've got a big bark for such a little guy." I let her scratch my neck for a minute. She was very good at it. Her fingers knew just the right spots. "Oh, be careful," said a voice from behind. "That's Max. He's..." Gail's words trailed off as the girl scratched harder and I leaned against her hand. "Aggressive," Gail finished. "Huh? He seems to like you a lot." "He's sweet," the girl said. "Believe me, nobody has ever called Max sweet before. Are you interested in adopting a dog?" The girl looked up. "Oh, I wish I could. But I already have a dog. I mean, not now. I don't have her right now. I mean, I'm just in New York for the summer. My dog's at home. I'm sorry." She'd stopped scratching. I licked at her fingers to remind her to start again, or maybe to reach into the pen and get me so we could be together. But for some reason, the girl didn't seem to understand. She pulled her hand away and stood up. "Sorry. I wish I could," she said to Gail. "I wish you could too," Gail answered. The girl sighed. "I have to go," she muttered, and then she left. She walked away. My girl was leaving without me. Poor Max. What's going to happen in chapter 3? Let's wait to find out. Skip. Hi. Sit, Biscuit. Sit. 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 Good boy.